Well, thankfully, the first international window of the season is almost over, and Premier League football will return this weekend. Over the next 2 days on the channel, we'll be previewing this weekend's Premier League and Championship action, and of course that starts today as I look ahead to Fulham versus Luton Town, a game of course I will be attending. So we're going to have a quick preview of the match, as well as looking ahead to the Premier League fixtures at the weekend with quickfire predictions. Let me know yours down in the comments as well, and if you beat my score, of course you will get a shout out in the recap. A quick plug for Luton fans, if you haven't seen it already, we did have an interview with a former Luton legend, Alan West, last week. You can find that up in the eye above, or it's also on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and any others if you want to check it out. Of course, in addition to that, the transfer window is now closed as well, and it's been, well, a dramatic finish in the midfield area for both of the teams playing this weekend. And of course, it's only 5 or 6 years ago that Luton didn't even have to worry about stopping for the international breaks, which shows how far we've come. However, we're going to start today by having a look ahead to Fulham versus Luton Town. And that means we've got to have a look back at Luton versus West Ham, and we will have a little look back as well at the Fulham game at Manchester City. VAR decisions were very important in both of them, and perhaps had a huge influence and bearing on the game, particularly in Luton Town's case. We're going to start with them because the West Ham game, of course, was the first game at Kenilworth Road since it had been redeveloped for the Premier League. And after a narrow victory against Gillingham in the Cup on a Tuesday night, there was a positive atmosphere in the stadium, and it maintained throughout the game, in fairness. Once we get into the action itself, though, under the lights, I was actually pretty impressed by Luton's first half performance, and I would go as far as to say we may have been the better team creating the better chances. However, it boiled down to the ruthlessness in both boxes, which is something that is going to be talked about a lot with promoted sides, and Luton Town absolutely no different. If you look at the goal we conceded, it was the only shot on target against in the half, and it was a goalkeeping howler, there's no doubting about it, it should be kept out. And other than that, West Ham posed an occasional threat on the break, but Luton generally managed them well in that first half, despite a couple of hairy defensive moments. In the other box though, perhaps was the more pertinent story, which something me and Charlie talked about a lot in the preview for that West Ham game, is can Luton get a team penned in for 10 minutes, put pressure on them, have a few corners in succession, break and get crosses into the box, and we did that. However, you cannot afford to miss chances from 1 or 2 yards. When you get those goalmouth scrambles, you've got to put them in the back of the net. And while Luton looked a threat for most of the game, it didn't really look like scoring, which I think is probably the story that sums up the season so far. So that perhaps is a bit of an issue, and of course we were hindered by skipper Tom Lockyer being injured, and a few other little bits on that regard as well. But overall, a very promising first half performance. The second half, as you would expect, was a bit more open. Early in the season, teams will tire in the second half, and as Luton chased the game, West Ham broke. And for whatever you want to say, the second goal is again the story of both boxes, because Kurt Zouma, of all people, to get virtually a free header 6 yards out from a corner, a James Ward-Prowse delivery is always going to be good, and Kurt Zouma is pretty likely to be one of the targets. So to not have that covered seemed a bit of an issue, and I'm never a fan of not having people on the post, and I think we saw why in that moment. However, Luton's response was good. They did score a late goal through Mads Andersen, who had a ropey first half an hour but grew into the game. And of course, if Tom Lockyer was fit, he probably wouldn't have played, but a nice moment for him regardless. And Luton were a threat on a counter. They did get a bit of pressure on West Ham towards the end. And of course, there was that VAR moment where James Ward-Prowse, who delivered the corner for West Ham's winner, ultimately should have been penalised and a penalty against, which would have given Luton a chance at a 2-2 draw. And the thing that annoys me most about that is not that Luton haven't got a Premier League point, but the fact that penalty wasn't awarded and there was no chance to convert it means that Charlie Betts got a perfect score for West Ham's 2-1 win, and I got nothing for predicting a 2-2 draw, which could have made me look a genius. However, VAR decisions seem to be a little all over the place this season. It's not been anywhere near as accurate as it has been previously, albeit there's always been little issues with it. But that decision highlighted it. The fact it wasn't checked, it really does leave a lot to be desired. And ultimately, it's cost Luton their first Premier League point. Thanks to Burnley's form later in the weekend, we're obviously not bottom, but that could change this weekend as we go away to Fulham. Another London trip, but this time back to a 3 p.m. on Saturday. And I think Fulham will be feeling pretty hard done by when it comes to VAR as well, because they've had 2 red cards this season, and discipline is going to be something we talk about. But Tim Reams was pretty controversial at home to Brentford, and of course that was a game where they got completely outplayed in the end. And then we go to their other heavy defeat just before the international break at Manchester City, a game in which they were incredibly competitive first half and were due to go in at the break at 1-1, until Nathan Aké's goal, which even Erling Haaland said he was amazed it wasn't ruled out for offside, which kind of tells you a lot, doesn't it? Another baffling VAR decision, and again has affected the opponents of Luton this weekend. And while it was unlikely they may have gone on to get a point, it certainly did change the game with that goal on the stroke of half time. For Fulham, they've actually had a pretty interesting transfer window. Most of the headlines were made by the fact that Aleksandar Mitrovic moved on, of course one of those who went on a big money deal to Saudi. And there is no doubt they haven't replaced him up front. Of course Vinicius has stayed. Of course they've also managed to bring in Raul Jimenez, who, with the greatest of respect, unfortunately, has never been the same since that head injury, and he is 32 now as well. But there are some very good solid Premier League additions. Alex Iwobi late in the window works into Marco Silva's style perfectly. Calvin Bassey, a solid signing, albeit he had the red card at Arsenal. Even the likes of Castagna and Adama Traore, they're experienced seasoned Premier League pros. And if you look through the squad beyond Mitrovic, there is no doubt that they have upgraded their squad overall. Marco Silva, of course, will probably be looking forward to facing Luton Town as well. The last time we went to Craven Cottage at the end of the 21-22 Championship season, I think we'll remember the score, don't we? Fulham 7, Luton Town 0. Of course, Mitrovic was involved in 5 of those goals, either scoring, assisting or key passing. And equally, Luton went on to make the playoffs the next week, so it didn't have a long-term effect. I'll happily take a 7-0 defeat again if it guarantees us staying up. Not sure it's going to work out that way. Ultimately, I do think this game will be a bit closer and maybe a bit more like what we saw at Kenilworth Road in the same season where it was a hard-fought 1-1 draw. My big questions really boil down to counter-attacking because Adama Traore has been used as a substitute. Alex Iwobi will be his debut, will probably be on the bench as well. Those are the sorts of players that can cause us trouble. We saw it with Jared Bowen against Ryan Giles. We also saw it occasionally through the middle with Antonio. Luton are susceptible to that counter. It did for us at Brighton, it did for us at Chelsea, and away at Fulham, I do worry it may be the same story. However, the flip side of that is defensively, Fulham maybe aren't the strongest this year. Of course, João Paulinho should be back, having missed the Manchester City game, and agonisingly for him, missed out on a move to Bayern Munich. But what sort of form, what sort of spirit is he going to be in? Well, hopefully he's been cheered up by winning the Fulham goal of the month for August with that equaliser at Arsenal. But a very good player. And it's just what spirit he's in after that move collapsing. Because Bayern, of course, a Champions League club, a huge club. It's a big opportunity missed out on for a professional footballer. However, a quality player in front of what has been an inconsistent defence at time this season. We mentioned the 2 red cards for defenders, Tim Ream and Calvin Bassey. And we've also got to bear in mind that they're letting 3 at home to Brentford. Yes, they kept a clean sheet against Everton on the opening day, but if Everton had had any sort of centre forward, they probably would have lost by 2 or 3. They're letting 5 at City and 2 against Arsenal. There's no shame in that. And they have had a pretty difficult start, but there are signs defensively that there's perhaps going to be a bit more struggle. And of course, we talked about it before, Luton are going to have that big front too. They like to take on players, they like to run at players when they get possession as well. With 2 wing-backs going forward, with at least 1 supporting for midfield. If Fulham are playing that higher line, can the likes of Ross Barkley or Talif Chong find that through ball? More importantly, running at defences, can they find that yellow card, that penalty, that free kick in a dangerous position, maybe even another red card for Fulham? It is going to be a story of the counter-attack this game, I feel. We know Luton are going to have less of the possession. They did it against West Ham, let them dominate the ball. But Luton have got an attacking threat. It's just whether they're ruthless in the box, and I'm not sure that we're quite ready to be there yet. 2 weeks working with a lot of the squad will hopefully have helped. Fulham, of course, integrating a few new players, but what about Luton in midfield? Because on deadline day, Albert Sambi Lokonga came in on loan from Arsenal. Looks a really humble player, the sort of Luton fit again. But the big question comes down to what does Rob Edwards do in there? Because generally he's been playing with Nakamba sitting and 2 centre midfielders trying to push on in Chong, Barkley, Pelly, whoever it is. Now you've got to ask a different question. As much as we were competitive against Brighton and Chelsea, we were carved open on the counter. Does he opt for Lokonga and Nakamba and maybe have 2 more slightly defensive options away from home against decent teams? And of course, having 2 sitting players isn't necessarily a negative because it can allow the wing-backs to push further forward, as we saw with Nakamba joining last year in the Championship. It allowed us to play further up the pitch in other positions. So there's going to be a bit of intrigue tactically to this one, and it does make it very hard to predict. Now, I have been sat between two score lines for almost all of the week, and I've not really been able to decide which one to go for. My head is probably telling me it's going to be a 2-1 Fulham win. My heart is telling me that Fulham won't take their chances and we might nick a 1-1 draw. And I know whichever one I go for, I'm going to get criticism for either being too pessimistic for Luton or for being too optimistic against an established team. But I'm going to stick my neck on the line here. I'm going to predict it. The first Luton point of the season. A 1-1 draw against Fulham. I should have got it right for the West Ham game if VAR had done its job. So let's hope this weekend my score prediction is not settled by VAR. But I will be gutted if it's 2-1 to Fulham now. But with our Luton preview out the way, let's move on to our quickfire predictions for the rest of the Premier League. And we start with a full recap of matchday 4, because for me, it was just the 4 points in the end. Should have been 7 if that penalty was given. Correct outcomes for Spurs, City, Crystal Palace and Arsenal. And Arsenal's third goal at the end, that cost me a perfect score too. But supported a couple of you guys. Quite a few of you managed to beat me in the comments this week, so let me get the full list out. I got 4, but Chris, you managed to get 5. Forrest got 6. All perfect outcomes for you two. W&G got 7, including a perfect score for that late 3-1 Arsenal win. Luke got 8, including a Luton score, so was very happy that late penalty wasn't given. And then 2 winners joined on 10 points, but one of you got 2 perfect scores. Mitchell got 10 points, including a brilliant call for Brentford versus Bournemouth. But the ever-consistent Steve, joint top of both the Premier League and the Championship this week. He got perfect scores for Luton versus Arsenal and also 10 points overall. So that was the last set of matches before the international break. Let's move on to my predictions for matchday 5. Of course, you know I'm going for a 1-1 draw between Fulham and Luton. I'm hoping the Championship's perfect scoreline will deliver a league higher. The rest of the weekend, though, I have gone for this. I've gone for Liverpool to win 2-1 away at Wolves. We know Wolves haven't got the biggest goal threat, but a lot of Liverpool's attacking players are far away on international duty, which may make it a bit trickier. Of course, a lot of these sides have got to worry about Europe next midweek as well. We'll be doing a live watch along on Twitch on Thursday. You can come and follow that. Aston Villa will feature in that live stream, and they are playing Crystal Palace at the weekend. I've gone for a comfortable 3-1 home win. The next weekend, I might have to factor in the European hangover. We know about Fulham Luton 1-1. I've gone for Manchester United to continue their poor start with a 2-1 defeat at home to Brighton. A Tottenham 2-0 win, a comprehensive one at home to Sheffield United. The same for City away at West Ham. They always seem to win comfortably there. I'm going for 3-0 on this occasion. I'm for Newcastle to bounce back with a 3-2 win in an entertaining game at home to Brentford. I've gone for Chelsea to nick a 1-0 away at Bournemouth, and they're not looking great in front of goal, but I think they will get their win this time. I've gone for Everton to shock Arsenal in the surprise result of the weekend. I remember Dyche's Everton last season. They found a way to do it. I was at Goodison the year before for the same fixture. Damari Gray put one in the top corner in the last minute. There seems to be a mental block there for Arsenal, and while there's not much suggestion that Everton are going to get a result in this game, I feel like I've got to go for it. So I'm going for 2-1 to Everton. I know a few people will be upset by that. And then on Monday night, I'm going for Forest to beat Burnley by 2-0. Again, Burnley not started well enough defensively. It'll be interesting to see if they can adapt their style as Steve Cooper did with Forest last year. So those are my predictions for matchday 5 in the Premier League. As always, let me know in the comments if you agree or disagree with them. And please give us your score predictions for this weekend's action as well. What do you think of my assessment of the Luton game? And what do you think of my scores for the others? Of course, if you beat my overall score in the predictions, you will get a shout out in the recap in the next episode. That one will be looking ahead to Luton versus Wolves, another big game at home for Luton Town. But if you did enjoy this one, please do chuck a thumbs up on the video. Don't forget to join us tomorrow for Championship predictions. If you want to make sure you don't miss it, subscribe and turn that notification bell on. You'll get alerts every time a new video releases. And we'll see you back here tomorrow for this weekend's Championship predictions.